Celebrity chef Curtis Stone shares his secret to the perfect steak, and why you should always rest your meat during cooking. Celebrity chef Curtis Stone has shared his secret to cooking the perfect steak. He said the trick is resting your cooked steak on a rack during mid-cooking. Next, place the meat back into the hot pan for a further 60 seconds on each side. The restaurateur also shared other culinary secrets to cook steak to perfection by Cindy Tran for Daily Mail Australia, published 2:32 Greenwich Mean Time, the 28th of October 2019, updated 3:47 Greenwich Mean Time, the 28th of October 2019. Celebrity chef Curtis Stone has revealed his secrets to cooking steak to perfection. Australian celebrity chef Curtis Stone has revealed his secret to cooking the perfect steak every time. The restaurateur said the trick was resting your cooked steak on a rack after cooking, before placing the meat back into the hot pan for a further 60 seconds on each side. There's probably a step in there you're not familiar with, which is resting the steak, Curtis told Channel 7's The Morning Show. You've got to let it rest for maybe 4 to 5 minutes in between the 60 seconds on each side. Not resting before serving, but resting mid-cooking. You're letting the juices distribute back through the steak. I know it's a technical way of cooking steak, but I tell you what, it's really worth it. Scroll down for video. The restaurateur said the trick is resting your cooked steak on a rack during cooking before placing the meat back into the hot pan for a further 60 seconds on each side. Curtis Stone's tips to cook the perfect steak: bring the steak to room temperature for at least 45 minutes before cooking. Season with salt and pepper. Cook on high heat until caramelized. Rest steak for at least 4 minutes on a rack during mid-cooking. Place the meat back into the hot pan for a further 60 seconds on each side, cooking over high temperature in a cast iron pan. Curtis demonstrated with a piece of Wagyu beef. You want a nice hot pan. Once you get that caramelization, you turn it over. You want that nice big sear, so that's why you want that hot pan, he said. Earlier this year, Curtis shared his foolproof recipe to cooking steak to perfection. To help the meat cook evenly on the hot stove, the ambassador of Coles suggested bringing the steak to room temperature about 45 minutes before cooking. That's called tempering your steak, Curtis said in a YouTube video. You let it come up to room temperature, you're gonna get a much more even cook by doing it that way. Cooking over high temperature in a cast iron pan, the chef uses a piece of Wagyu beef. Curtis said he cooks the steak until they form a caramelization, before turning them over. Once the meat came to room temperature, Curtis said he prefers seasoning his steak with salt and pepper on both sides before rubbing a dash of oil. Be generous with your seasoning, because don't forget, it's impossible for you to season the inside of the steak, so seasoning the outside is really important, he said. It's also going to help give you that gorgeous crust that you're looking for. You want to cook it on a nice, high heat, then you're going to get that beautiful sear, and that's where you get that delicious crust on the outside. Then just drizzle them with oil, and rub it all over. I like to do it this way. Some people prefer to brush their actual grill, but I like to use a tiny bit of oil. You really don't need a lot to cook the perfect steak, depending on the thickness of the cut. Curtis said he usually cooks his steak for about 2.5 minutes on both sides. The tendency is to mess with it, but just have the confidence to leave it in the pan. We're looking for a deep, golden brown, and you're going to get it. Be patient, he said. Curtis said always be generous with seasoning, because it gives you a delicious crust halfway through the cooking process. Curtis said he uses a pair of tongs to stand the steak up on its side to render the fat before he turns the meat over. It gives a little bit of caramelization to the fat, which runs on top of the porterhouse. Curtis said render the fat for just 20 seconds before you flip it to the other side. Once the steaks were cooked, he places them on a rack to rest rather than a plate, because this prevents them from sweating in their own juices. Don't skip this step, it's really important. It's the key to the perfectly succulent, juicy steak, he said. Now, if you cut the steak straight away without resting it, those juices will all run out, and you're going to lose a lot of the flavor and the juiciness of the steak. Curtis said if you end up with red in the middle, and gray on the outside, that's because the temperature has